All right, everyone, welcome to week 16 of Renaissance to Modern Art. And this week is all about chapter 33. All right, so this week, read chapter 33 in your book. So I can't cover a lot of it in these lecture times. So I almost feel like this course should be divided into two because there's so much covered. So the slideshow, for example, is in class materials also under week 16, so you can take a closer look at it. But I mostly want to talk about pop art and minimalism because that's a part of your discussion question. So before I get into that, I will quickly address one more time the final. So I talked about it in the last 2 weeks in the videos, what you're supposed to do if you need to go back and look at those. But the document is posted under class materials if you scroll all the way down, and the discussion board should be put up. And I'll be keeping a closer eye on my email, checking it more often as we get closer to that deadline. So please don't hesitate to email me with any questions. And then also, excuse me, my cold. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. And if you're looking for extra credit, don't hesitate to ask. I can have an extra credit assignment for you if you feel like you need it. Alright, so I'm really going to stop this lecture at like the 30-minute mark. I feel, yes, like I said, I feel like this course could be like 2 courses almost, because there's so much interesting things to cover, and it's really hard to talk about it in the lecture, all of it in the lecture. So I'm just going to go over the most important things. So this week is how did the emergence of pop art and minimalism in the early 1960s reflect cultural changes in the post-war United States? And then compare and contrast works associated with each movement. So, for example, I have a work here that I found by Andy Warhol. He was a pop artist. This is Campbell Soup Can. And then this is one of Donald Judd's famous pieces. And he was a minimalist. So I'm going to talk about this in a very general way. I'm not going to really compare these 2 pieces specifically, but you can look at each piece and notice the differences between when I talk about pop art and minimalism. So pop art, it's really like, for the subject matter, it's a celebration of culture, media, celebrities, and products. And minimalism is about geometric forms and industrial materials. So the tone of the pieces. Pop art is very playful, it can be ironic, and sometimes critical. And minimalism can be serious, objective, or even meditative. Now the techniques used, so we have silk screen for pop art. That's a type of printmaking, painting, and assemblage. And then for minimalism, more fabrication, repetition, and precision. But I feel like techniques overlap between the two, or I would say techniques do overlap between the two. And then cultural reflection. So pop art is really the critique and embrace of consumerism. So it's embracing it or critiquing it. And then minimalism is more of a reaction against it or a rejection of it. And then the viewer engagements. So with pop art, you're recognizing familiar images. And then with minimalism, you're experiencing the space and material directly. So that's just like an overall like general comparison of the 2 art movements and differences that you would see in the 2 styles. So, an important piece that really breaks away from abstract expressionism is Jasper John's Target with Plaster Casts. So he made this in 1955, and it was really a reaction against abstract expressionism. So if we think about like Jackson Pollock and his spontaneity and expressiveness in his work, like using his body and his movements to pour paint all over the canvas, Jasper Johns is his work is much more controlled, and he is still expressive, but he's challenging traditional uses of materials. So Jackson Pollock is still using like canvas on paint. He is really rethinking about how to make a painting. But Jasper Johns is making this almost like assemblage with the casts and the hinged box, and then painting the target. And so the painting of the target is recognizable as a symbol, but it's not really specific. So it's almost as if the art piece is an object itself. It's not really this is very hard to explain. So it's more about questioning like what is art. So it's blurring the line between a symbol and object. So he paints the way he paints the target and represents it on this hinged door. It's almost the object instead of just a representation of an object. And I think that's the best way to explain it. So like if we're painting a tree, we're representing the image of a tree. And here, the painting of the target, that really is the object itself. It's representing itself as the art object, if that makes sense. And the viewer can interact with the hinged doors, not anymore, by opening them up and shutting them. And so how we really confront this piece is how we perceive its meaning. And so again, every art movement is usually a reaction against the previous one, because artists continually want to question like, what is art? How does the viewer see and experience art? So it's kind of this shift into conceptual and modern art, and also pop art and minimalism. And so you can see the minimalism, there's like the circular target, and then the pop art, the target is also a very popular symbol in media. All right, so the world since the 1950s, so the political and economic shifts brought by the end of World War II meant that the US and Soviet Union emerged as the world's powerful nations, and this led to the Cold War, and the strategy of mutually assured destruction was intended to deter nuclear war. And then the United Nations' effort to maintain global peace have proven inadequate, and the terrorist attack on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon on September 11, 2001 only exacerbated racial, ethnic, and religious conflicts. All right, so, and then this is really what art is since the 1950s. So what is art? And do works need to be objects, or can they be ideas? Is it a combination of idea and object? So art that causes us to question our own morality is rarely easy to look at, yet it engages us in necessary conversation. So this is really key to art since the 1950s, is that it's meant to engage people in conversation. So some of these I'm going to skip over. The art world was expanding, so artists were acknowledging art to popular culture through assemblage and collage, so fragmentation, relativism, and this messy relation. So pop artists and photographers made new aspects of art and advertisements visible. All right, so finding new forms. So different ways to make art. So assemblages. So this is like wood glued together and then painted black to make this overall very nice, beautiful, cohesive piece of art. So what can art be made out of? So questioning materials. Yes, using a lot of non-traditional materials. All right, so I'm going through this very quickly. Happenings and performance art were also becoming very popular and are often just remembered through photographs or some were films, but the artists really putting themselves or the audience into the art. And sometimes it would happen in museums, or sometimes it would happen in the street or theaters. It really depended. And so all you have left really is the photographs. So it was really, if you were at one of these happenings or performance pieces, it was really special. Okay. And then so here was a photograph. Artists Alan Copro made like a yard of tires, and the viewer that would walk through the tires, and so it was like really about the viewer experiencing the art. And then this is Meat Joy. So people rolling around in meat, and some of these happenings were very strange, and maybe questioning like people's morals and values. All right, so Fluxus events were deliberately acted performances that often focused on ordinary behaviors that were presented as written scores. So George Brecht seated 3 Aquas events as one of 69 cars to be performed by the reader. So this is another way that the artist would bring the reader into the art piece. So the reader would read the card, and then someone would perform the action. All right, so this is a very vulnerable piece by Yoko Ono. She did a lot of kind of like spontaneous art pieces, and this is one where she invited audience members to come up and cut pieces of her clothing. So it's very much about vulnerability and trust. Okay, so I'm going to move on. All right, so to pop art. All right, so the emergence of pop art and minimalism in the early 1960s All right, so I'm going to talk about pop art and then I'll move on to minimalism. Reflected significant cultural changes in the post-war United States society. So this was really when consumer culture was rising and there was increasing skepticism of traditional values and a growing interest in mass media and abstraction, while both movements broke away from the emotional intensity of abstract expressionism. They did so in very opposing ways. So pop art was reflecting consumerism and mass culture. So it was celebrating it or critiquing it. So artists like Andy Warhol, Roy Lichtenstein, and Claes Oldenburg drew their imagery from comic books, logos, celebrities, and everyday objects. And often they blurred the lines between what is considered low culture and high culture. So if you see for example, so for example, if you see a label of a Campbell soup can, it is very, you could say, is that art because it is printed ink on paper on a can. But then if it's made into a painting, it all of a sudden elevates that image into the status of being worthy of an art piece because it can be hung in a museum for people to be appreciated. All right, so pop artists did use collage a lot. So Today's Homes is a satire of modern life and materialism in marketing campaigns. So this is about Adam and Eve, and they're really surrounded by the consumer culture that is developing. And then Andy Warhol, he was really dominant of the war scene. And so this is kind of like a homage. So this is a bit more serious. So it's like a homage to Marilyn Monroe after her suicide, and really maybe not so much a critique of her, but maybe a critique of the viewer or people that followed her or worshipped her or loved her. And I think if this can be contemplated and really thought about in a more serious manner. So he exploited the lie that mass media brings us closer to the world and emphasized that viewers can only observe it as these detached voyeurs. And so his immense body of work included Brillo boxes, Campbell soup cans, Coca-Cola bottles, and he used the print method of silk screen. And the Brillo boxes transformed the gallery space into what looked like a grocery stockroom. All right, so this is also high art and low art. So he's basically just reproducing a Brillo box that would be sold in a store, and then putting it as in a museum or gallery space, elevating it up to a higher status. And then Roy Lichtenstein based his art on cartoon imagery. So using Ben-Day dots from offset printing. So rather than a copy, Oh Jeff, I Love You Too, but is formally adjusted and tightened, pitting an overblown episode into a work of high art. So it's like taking the still from a cartoon scene, blowing it up into a very giant art piece, and but it's well crafted and made, and elevating it to a different status. and questioning like what is art. And then to move on to minimalism. So on the other hand, minimalism rejected narrative, emotion, and representation. And this also is, can be up for debate, because how can we really reject representation and emotion even when something is very minimal? So this art movement is very contemplative and meditative. But Donald Judd, Dan Flavin, and Agnes Martin really emphasized simplicity, repetition, and industrial materials. So it reflects a desire for clarity and order, and it's meant to counterbalance the chaos of modern life and spectacle of media saturation. So it's, here we're talking about it as like an art movement, but it's also become like, it's like a movement in life. Like people say, I'm a minimalist, I live minimally. People are, getting rid of clothes out of their closet, or creating very sleek spaces in their homes, not buying a lot of things. So this art movement is a part of that minimalist movement. Or, I don't know if minimalist art inspired like minimalist living. That's something I'm actually not sure about. I feel like the art came first. All right, so here's a piece, 1969. So galvanized iron and plexiglass, 10 units. So very industrial. It's supposed to be very cold. And then here's 4 wooden cubes of industrial mirror glass that deflect the viewer's eyes from finding any interest in the object itself. In Morris's work, Untitled Mirror Cube. So the interest of this piece lies in its concept, which is the purpose and goals, interrogating the purpose and goals of the artist. So the concept, you have these 4 cubes together, and then you can see them mirroring them, reflections of the cubes and the other cubes, and then also how would the artist or the viewers be reflected in those cubes when they're interacting with them. So that's really the idea of the artist, is to get people to think about what they're looking at and what's happening while they're looking at it. And so the dematerialization of art. So really thinking about it as non-commoditable and dematerialized, so it wasn't something that could be really bought. All right, so there's different art movements that we could talk about that break with a lot of traditions. So it's very dynamic, and it's, you can see that it's shaped by a lot of shifts that happen in the culture, political, and the changes in technology. So artists were really continually redefining what art is, and a lot of it had to do with breaking from those traditions. So we see things like concepts and identity, feminist art. We did look at performance and body art. And then I will talk about this piece in closing. But I'd also encourage you to look at like postmodern art. There's graffiti art, global contemporary art, digital art, land art, art that really is about activism, and identity that addresses social issues like environmental art. I mean, there's just so much to cover. But just to really talk about conceptual art in this one last piece. So conceptual art and language, which I really feel like abandons painting to examine this conceptual intersection of language and vision, symbolism, and what the art object is. So Joseph Kusith, his early work was indebted to the linguistic philosophy of Ludwig Wittgenstein. So a lot of artists were looking at philosophers, academics, other subject matters to infuse within their art. So 1 in 3 chairs presents an actual chair, a photograph of a chair, and the dictionary definition of a chair. All right, so, and then it's really asking like, what is art? So we know what the definition of a chair is, and then here it is put on a wall. So is that kind of like something that's just a narrative that's explaining what the other objects are, or is this art itself? And then the photograph of the chair. So we see photograph, or by this time photography was seen as art. So if you take a photograph of a chair, suddenly it's art when you hang it on the wall. But then there's a chair sitting there in an art gallery, which is an ordinary object. So it's talking about like the craftsmanship of the chair, and how you place it, or in what context you put it in. Does it become art? Especially when it's placed next to these other two objects. So it's really contemplating about like, what is the definition of what we call art, and yes, what is the definition of art? How do we look at art and think about art? And yes, I think this is where I'm going to end it. I really hope that you take time to look at the rest of the slideshow, and if you can use any of the pieces in the slideshow too for your final, which they're all in chapter 33. So please take a good look at that, and because there's so many art movements, and like I said, I feel like this could be a 2-semester class because there's like so many art movements that are happening, and it's kind of nicer to talk about some of the pieces a little more in depth than flashing through the slides really quickly. And even going through them quickly, my experience, I found it's really hard to get through all of them. So I hope that overall that this course has been educational through where we started from about the pre-Renaissance, the very early startings of Renaissance, all the way through modern. It is an overview. So if you were to go on to study art history, there are classes that are offered that really do focus on specific periods. Like there would be a class that could focus on, for example, just like the pre-Raphaelites, or Italian painting of the 15th century. So art classes, art history classes do get very, very much more focused if you decide to take more in the future. And this is really just an overview of the movements. So Anyways, if you have your questions, please email them to me. Otherwise, I've really enjoyed like reading everything that you've written. I feel like a lot of you have really developed your skills to critique and look at art as the class has progressed. And yes, I will be giving really good feedback on your finals too. All right, and I hope you have a great summer. All right, goodbye.